Hi, we'll be removing note takers and other AI who join. We'd rather have humans. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. I see some friends in the audience. Welcome, everyone. Friends of Librarians of India, friends of libraries. Some of some of the registrants have also opted to join us on YouTube. So we'll be taking your questions and comments and passing them on to this main call during the course of the panel discussion. We'll begin in exactly 1 more minute, just giving people another minute to join.
Anyone else getting an echo? Okay, Madhana.
Okay, welcome everyone. Um, I know that you're probably just as excited as I am for this panel discussion on an amazing book written by many, many people, but edited by Sandhya Rao and Shelja Menon. We have them here with us, along with some of the contributors of this book. I look forward to this exciting evening, and I'm going to hand over to Apeksha and Nirupama to introduce our esteemed panelists.
Thank you, Mika. So before we begin, as we know, as these events are, many of us do drop out because of our commitments and the nature of online events. Please do take a moment to take a look at your screen and feel free to scan the QR code, which has the links to all of our platforms, including our WhatsApp community. And we're so very excited for this evening's online panel. Jumping right in, and one of our esteemed panelists, as we know, is Sandhya Rao, who's a journalist, a books editor, a children's author, and she also consults the Tata Trust initiatives on children's books and is extremely passionate about making books accessible in all Indian languages. Thank you so much and welcome, Sandhya. Our next esteemed speaker is Mridula Koshi, and she is a community organizer and a free library movement activist in the Free Libraries Network. She's also a trustee of the Community Library Project in Delhi NCR and feels fortunate that she has a chance to work every day with others and create a more just world. Thank you and welcome, Mridula.
Good evening, everybody. Our next panelist is Dr. Shailaja Menon. She is a consultant with Tata Trust on early learning and literacy. She's the co-editor of the lovely book that our discussion is based on today, Children's Books, An Indian Story. And she serves on prominent children's juries, including the Hans Christian Andersen Award for 2026. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Menon. And our next panelist, who's also the moderator of the event, is Tejasvi Shivanand. Tejasvi Shivanand works with children and adults in libraries in Bangalore and a few other places all across India. So welcome, Tejasvi, and handing over the reins to you.
Thank you, Nirupama, Apeksha, and Neeta. And welcome, everyone. And it's lovely to see so many of you as part of today evening on this call. I think what's really wonderful is that we now have a chance um, to open out this book in some ways with a bunch of librarians. All my colleagues and friends in the library community, welcome especially to you for being part of this event. And for me personally, when I used to teach at the library educators course, the English course, which is run by Bookworm Goa, and we used to kind of use pieces as part of the course to kind of anchor some ideas. But when we did that, we often had a shortage of pieces from the Indian context. And one of the things that we had to do is bring in Indian books and kind of locate the books in pieces that were from abroad, like academic pieces, pieces of writing that talked about perspectives and practices on children's literature and how it's used. But this book, as some of you have read, I hope many of you have a copy. Some of you have dipped into it. Some of you have read it right through. I don't know how you've engaged with it, but I hope all of you have seen it at least and held a copy and had a chance to look at some parts of it. If you look at what this book has done compared to what when I used to kind of teach in the course, what I had, it has opened out a whole set of pieces on perspectives and practice around children's literature in India. And that I think is very special. And for us librarians who work with children, um, it's important that we have access to a compendium of this kind, where we can go back at our when we have questions. When we work with children, we notice something. When we read a book, we have questions. How do we kind of address this? We may not have people immediately to kind of give us a perspective. We may not be part of a course at some point. We may not, be part of a network for some reason. But we have this book as a starting point where we can go back and look at some of the perspectives and practices that are given over there, which allow you to engage with children's book with different dimensions of what a children's book are and what they do when children read them. So I feel that in today's panel discussion, before I introduce you a little bit to the book and go into the book in depth with our panelists, um, there it's as the title says, children's books, an Indian story. Today's discussion will be centered around children and children's books. So it is as important to think about who we are working with because we are librarians. We work in libraries, we work with children, but at the same time, we work with these books, right? So keeping both of these in mind is what we will go ahead with as we open out some questions in the panel. And the structure of today will be basically a panel discussion for about 30 minutes, followed by audience interactions. We take questions from you and the panelists respond for another 30 minutes. And then finally, we have some questions, maybe some themes that are emerging from the audience interaction that the panelists will come back to and address in the last 15 minutes of the event. So that's how it's going to be. Now, coming back to the book. Now, the book, I mean, I don't have to mention if you have already not seen it. It's published by Eklavya, and it's supported by Parag initiative of the Tata Trust. And I think the idea came sometime back to Sandhya, who wanted to do this for a very long time, put a book of this kind together, and found like an ally in Shailaja who's also been interested in a similar project for a while. And I think they both got together with a group of people some years ago and started putting together as a group what this book should contain. And then the process, as it evolved, the contributors fell in place, and then the book slowly emerged, and it got finally published last year. The book itself, if you see the structure of the book, has four sections. If you haven't read it, so the beginning is just giving you an introduction to children's literature in the Indian context, which begins with with the nature of stories in the Indian context and in the Indian cultural context and historical trends in publishing. And after that section, you have another section looking at the books themselves. Basically, what constitutes these books? What are there in the books? How are illustrations dealt with in these books? How are themes dealt with in these books? What are the different genres that are there in these books? Uh, there are more in-depth pieces on particular aspects like morals and and humor, non-fiction, young adult books. So if along with each of these pieces, you also have voices that are also there, voices of a writer, voice of a publisher, an illustrator. So you have alternating with perspective pieces, voices of people who work in the field. So it's not just getting a sense, an overview of what these books contain, but also people who are involved in its creation and its engagement with children. So coming to this third section, where we look at okay, what issues inform the content and the production of children's literature, and there you have issues around childhood diversity, looking at children with special needs, and of course, there is one thing I think I know the editors are going to say this, but I'm going to preempt that and say that they wanted a piece on regional children's literature, which is not part of this compendium. That's all right. We'll wait for part two for including that. But that's part of issues. In some sense, the translations are addressing part of that, but there would be other aspects that also need to be addressed in this. And finally, there is a very important part which is close to me and to all of you. And there you have a section on how do you engage with children's literature. There you have the children's literature and its relationship to literacy. There's an entire piece on how children respond to literature. And finally, you have uh, what's the role of libraries in all of this and the nature of the library space itself. So now, if you look at it again, you have perspective pieces, interviews, interspersed by voices. You know, the voice of a reader, the voice of a writer, the voice of a librarian. So one of our librarians who's contributed to this is also in the audience. I'm sure Usha is here. I know. I think there are others as well who have contributed to this book. So welcome all of you. This is basically the landscape of the book. The content, of course, is diverse, and I would urge you to take a look at this. The approach has been each writer has a different style in which they presented the content. I would urge you to read them slowly. Go back to them. They are pieces that may sometimes you may want to read them in one stretch and you just get immersed in it, but I would urge you to keep going back because there is much to these pieces that would kind of let it seep into you, let it kind of maybe inform you when you're looking around you. ask questions. Don't just accept what's being said in those pieces. Ask questions when you work with children. Say, okay, I don't think this is all right. I don't agree with the writer, because you will have your views and your observations which would be different from the experience of who have contributed to this book. So engage with it critically, engage with it seriously, engage with it over a period of time. So that is my introduction to the book, to all of you. I'm sure you'll have more to discover as you go along. But like I said, now we can slowly move to the panel. And I think, like I began today, uh, like this book is about children and about the books, right? When we often talk of children's books, and often it happens that with people who create books, who are involved in the publishing side of things, the children part of it is a bit of an unknown. Often don't engage a lot with children directly. They may have a sense of who children are, where they come from, and so on. It may inform them in particular ways in how they decide to publish titles. But often, what happens, we that information is kind of is absent, or is not fully present for them to take decisions. At the same time, as librarians, we work in different pockets. We are in like a library in Assam, maybe a library in Karnataka, a library in Delhi, and one in Chennai. So it may be that we know our children, maybe our a group of 8 or a group of 800. So it may be that we know our children very well, and we may not be very familiar with what's happening with other children. Now, who are these children whom we work with? And why is it important that when we are thinking of a book like this, which is bringing out so many different perspectives of Indian children's books, right? When, as librarians, when we go and we work with these children, what are we kind of going with? How do we understand that process of engagement with this various groups of children? What should be the library's role there? Since we are talking of libraries, and we are a group of librarians who are in this audience, I would like to begin today by opening it with Mridula, who works in the library space, who are library activists, but also works as part of a network of librarians across a free library network. Some of you are part of the network, some of you know of the network, and the community library project in Delhi, which is also part of the FLN, and has worked and spoken a lot and shared on multiple platforms. Mridula and others from the FLN have shared a lot on what libraries can do, and in creating access to children's books. Because again, like we are talking of the who are the children that we are working with, right? And where do these books go? If we look at it from that perspective, uh, how do we start from there, right? And then we will go into other issues related to what is there in the books themselves. But Mridula, I would like you to begin with your remarks. Uh,
Thank you, Tejasvi, for the kind welcome, and thank you for the chance to be part of this conversation to the organizers. So I think when my own experience is in the Community Library Project, which runs libraries in Delhi NCR. And what really matters about the work is that we started from dissonance with what is being said about reading in India, which is that people don't want to read. And we did not think it was possible to enter into that dissonance without having a practice on the ground to inform. Not because we don't believe other practices that exist. Those are viable. Maybe almost everyone in this audience today has libraries, and one can step into any of these libraries and see joyful experiences of reading happening. And that would potentially be enough, except that when you're looking at organizing for change, one often wants to have a platform from which to talk about the change you're seeking. And it made sense then to have a movement that's in practice, to have libraries and then to speak from those libraries. It is also true that there is some dissatisfaction with the amount of librarianship and the amount of library-related knowledge and understanding corner of it, which might be academics, which might be librarians, which might be children's publishers or children's writers. We, without meaning to, give credence to this idea that children don't want to read or that people don't want to read. And that can look like, literature that affirms that. That can look like agreeing to small print runs or to dominant voices, or deciding that certain languages are difficult to publish in. We tell ourselves, that we're alone, that there are very few of us, so what can any one of us do? But we also know that we can do a lot, and that's why we gather in spaces like this. And so the community life credence, and we thought having a practice, but also having that practice in a movement to which everyone is invited, a movement for the right to read, allows us to then say, that this is not true, that people in India don't want to read, that children in India don't want to read. So that there is a possibility that we are doing the practice to see that people want to read. There is a possibility to share that with everyone, and then a possibility to actually, in an organized way, resist this message, so that we're not unwittingly corroborating it, that we're not unwittingly sort of walking into traps of saying, oh my gosh, well, I cannot publish that one language that is so difficult, and where do I get the funding to get that one library going? That doesn't exist right now. And actually, a million or so libraries don't exist right now that should exist, and that's so disquieting that it kind of makes sense that we run away from that truth. What I tried to talk about in my contribution to this book is the role caste has played in all of this, that we have this long disquieting experience. And sometimes what we do with disquieting experiences work to let ourselves be quiet about them, and how important it is, if we're going to have movements of resistance around the question of everyone being able to have reading and the right to read, well, they have the right to read, but to exercise that right, then we need to look at the question of how has it been that we arrived at this place where the libraries weren't created, where those of us who want to do something are in silos or in isolation from one another. And I think the role caste has played in this, and our kind of schooled response of not speaking it out loud has allowed things to continue for too long. And, I think I have maybe a minute or two more. One of the things is that when we open the door in the community library project, or perhaps in any of the 230 or so free libraries inside the Free Libraries Network, what we see is that children are not coming in equipped with what the system assumes they should be coming in with. So when we talk about joyful experiences of reading, and we are seeing children, sometimes because we have gone door to door in our neighborhoods, which in my library, we have a practice as librarians of doing that multiple times every week. And we bring the child in, what we see is our children who are more than hesitant. They are even evidencing experiences that have existed, at least in their lifetime, and perhaps generationally now, of experience, experience of humiliation in terms of that exclusion, so that we see kids who are not hesitant because they don't know how to read and they're new, and now we'll hold their hand and they'll learn how, or they'll see themselves in the book because here we have a diverse collection in our library. We're seeing children who are embodying in their reluctant entry into the library and into the welcome we're providing them. They're embodying a kind of generational experience of humiliation. And I remember this going back my first year in the library, which was 2014. Late 14, we opened the door and said it's free and everyone can come in. And I think we were naive and thought that the mechanism of free alone would mean that we can undo exclusion. And it was in that first year as children stumbled over the question of last name. We hadn't yet gotten to the question of the book cannot be read at home by the parent, or that that generations of people before that would not have been able to read that book to the child. That the library would have to provide daily reading and multiple times taking a book read to them at an age when maybe they were not educated as a constitutional right for people, that did not include reading, that the right to read wasn't there. There was only studying, the mandate to study, and that the books were designed for that, and the curriculum was designed for that, so that the library would have to equip itself with curriculum around read alouds. All of these were spaces where we were contending with things that became increasingly clear to us, pointed from that first issue of the last name, when we had a little half-page form that people had to fill out, name, phone number, to today, when lots and lots of young people in the library are reading aloud, and we have a whole generation of people who have grown up in the library reading to younger people in the library, sometimes people who have become parents, and sometimes just older siblings, and sometimes just neighbors, essentially a community of reading. How important it is that we now have ownership, which is part of the right to read. So that mechanism of free, or even like if all of us wrote great books, or if we published good books, would not alone be enough. There would also have to be the whole question of those who have been excluded should own the system. They should own the publishing system and the writing system and the education system and the library system. That then builds the inclusion they need. So the library looks radically different than what we conceived it would be. It is an anti-caste library, and the Free Libraries Network is that once you start talking anti-caste, because the people who are coming in have been excluded on the basis of caste, and they require that, and they're creating that, and that transfer of ownership results in an anti-caste movement, then you actually start seeing thriving reading.
No, thanks for this this start for us, Mridula, because I think what you have really described is, in the Indian context, the ultimate reality in some ways is caste. And if you were to create a library space that is anti-caste, how does it kind of transform a potentially reluctant entries into a thriving community of readers? And I think that kind of space, why is that important for these books to kind of reach and enable the changes that they can bring about among the children and the entire community of readers who participate in it? And what does that change look like? How does it happen over a period of time? Where do we start? And I think that's the start that you've kind of reminded us of, in terms of access is not simply creating more, but access is about what you do and what's the nature of that space that you create, who is involved, how do you as a librarian reflect on your own, where you've come from, who you are, how are you part of society, and what kind of questions are you asking yourself and the space that you're part of in creating accessibility for, and it's not just, I mean, in the sense, accessibility is not simply you creating something, but actually people who have been left out being part of creating something new. So thanks for that start, because I think what I wanted to now uh, take from there and ask you, Shailaja, is to if we look at, okay, I'm just trying to imagine now a wonderful future where there are a million libraries like the ones that do not exist are there at, and we have a wonderful collection of books in each of these libraries, which are diverse, contextual, and have been created by a range of people, across society, and not just by a certain set of dominant voices. And the librarians who are there, who are from, again, from every kind of background that you could possibly imagine. So utopia, but we are trying towards that. And in that kind of a situation, what would these books do in a library like that, right? Because one of the things that Mridula also said was children are struggling with very basic reading, right? The act of reading itself, decoding basic stuff, foundational literacy is kind of absent for various reasons, some of which Mridula addressed. But beyond that, what do these do? I mean, how are these two related? I think some of it is what you cover in your piece as well. But how do we think about diversity and uh, think of literacy and try to even go beyond what this can do?
Teju, thank you for your question. But before we go to utopia, can we talk about life as it is? And then we can try to look at the utopia as well. Because, right, I mean, when I was listening to Mridula, I was just resonating with this idea that, that reading, libraries need to provide reading outside because school is for studying, So school is for non-reading kind of thing. And then this use of this term foundational literacy, which has become such a catchphrase. And then people saying, how does literature fit into foundational literacy? I mean, if I were to sum up my career in just like a minute, I would say it has been to sort of re-engage with the idea of foundational literacy and re-argue what should go into the foundations of literacy. So many people sort of in our minds, we tend to distinguish between learning to read and reading to learn. And we think of learning to read equals learning the script, learning the aksharas, learning to read words, learning to read sentences, etc. That is learning to read. And then reading to learn is something that presumably follows learning to read. First you learn to read and then you read to learn. And when you read to learn, when you're ready to read to learn, that is when, literature, science, social science, I mean, all of those kinds of things, you are reading in order to learn, apparently. I mean, that is a common idea that I think many of us carry in our heads. So, no matter how much you talk to people, for example, there are many schools that even today will not give library periods to children in grades 1, 2, and 3, or definitely not Anganwadis. It's only in 4th and 5th with a lot of coaxing that they will provide them with library periods, or else it may be in 6th, 7th, and 8th, because then they're ready to learn to read to learn. So my point is that we really need to re-examine what it means to learn to read. Do we equate reading with decoding the script? If so, we can say, yes, learning to read is decoding the script. But when we say, for example, when we say we need literate citizens in a democracy like India, or in any society, when we need literate citizens, do we mean that we need citizens who know how to decode the script and sign their names? Or do we mean that we need citizens who are able to use their knowledge of script to function in empowered ways, in ways that can transform their own lives and the lives of society? And I would argue that it is in the latter. We actually mean the latter. We actually have an implicit idea of being literate that is broader than the idea that we enforce on young children in schools. We expect that children, human beings who are literate, are able to understand. We expect that they are engaging. We expect that they are responding, that they are critiquing, that they are appreciating the beauty of language. There are many aspects to being literate, to engaging with the world of language that we expect from literate citizens. And yet, when we talk about learning to read, we confine it to decoding the script. So for and all of us who interact with young children, who have young children at home or have worked with them in some capacity, know that children are amazing meaning makers. Young children in particular are curious about every little detail in their lives. And then they come to school and we ask them, we tell them, no, you're not ready to read to learn yet. Right now, you need to be learning to read. So shut off your curiosity, shut off your imagination, shut off your engagement, shut off your critical capacity, shut off your ability to appreciate literature, because you're not ready for any of this yet. We have not deemed you to be ready. So instead, let us read these very, very profound sentences like Ram Ghar Chal. And let us just stop there. Or, Kamal Ghar Bag. My favorite sentences are from, Karnataka curriculum, because I live in Karnataka. It's there all across India, so it's nothing specific to Karnataka. Because we want to give children words without any matras. So one of the early cards is Arasada Sarasa. That in Kannada means the king's necklace. Now, these children have never seen a king, nor are they concerned with the king's necklace. So this is not even a sentence. This is just a standalone phrase because it has no matras in it. It is considered to be very appropriate for a 6-year-old to spend it on Arasada Sarasa. The next one, because we need only words without matras, is Garasada Garagara. Garasa is the carpenter's saw, and Garagara is the sound that saw makes. Arasada Sarasa, now Garasada Garagara. And like this, there are 2-3 phrases. Now, we are very child-friendly and joyful these days. That's another beauty of our current climate. So we need to now string these meaningless phrases into a meaningful story without matras. A story without matras. I mean, I challenge any of you to tell a meaningful story without any matras in it. So then we have some kind of peculiar story where a king comes wearing a necklace and a carpenter is standing around with a saw that makes this garagara noise. We want our 6 and 7-year-olds to engage with this and make meaning. And then we say there's no reading with meaning. The child's mind is filled with meaning. Our world is filled with meaning. And we are deliberately filtering out this world of meaning from our young meaning makers and reducing them to read this. Now, am I saying that learning to decode the script is not important? It is critical. And Mridula, I agree 100% with you that we need serious, systematic attention to that. I am not downplaying that. But while a child is learning to decode the script, their mind is naturally wanting to make meaning. So why should you filter that meaning away, And so once you broaden the idea of learning to read as learning the script, but understanding the script, responding to what you're reading, critiquing it, appreciating the aesthetics of it. Once you say learning to read includes all of this, then when you teach a young child to read, you would teach all of this. And once you have this broader idea of literacy, literature is a natural connect. You cannot possibly teach a child to critique Arasada Garasa. How do I Sarasa? Whatever. How do I feel? There is no scope to appreciate the beauty or to critique this. It is nonsensical. So you need meaningful text in the classroom. And that is when sort of literature comes in and becomes a very powerful ally in teaching a young child to learn to read. And the decoding curriculum can run in parallel. I'm not arguing against the need for a decoding curriculum. I'm just saying it can run in parallel to enriched reading curriculum to read and engage with literature. So in that sense, I would say that before we talk of support, which is this aesthetics. When I talked about the aesthetics of reading, Louis Rosenblatt was an American educator who has written a lot on the aesthetic response. We tend to teach children how to extract information from text. So even if they read a wonderful storybook, even if you read a wonderful storybook to them, you tend to ask them who said what to whom, kind of, kisne kisko kya kaha kind of questions. That is what Louis Rosenblatt called the information extracting, or the efferent, E-F-F-E-R-E-N-T, stands to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information from a text. It is an important stance to reading, which is important to extract information important set of skills. But the aesthetic report from Rosenblatt, who said we should be asking the children what happened, not simply in the story, but rather within me as I read the story. What things struck me forcibly? What puzzled me? What meanings did others see in it? My classmates, my teacher, etc. So that aesthetic response, not ask what is in the story, but what is happening within me. I think that is just so powerful. So if you link that inner world of the child to the outer world of language and literature, then the word and the world get connected in truly meaningful ways. So that is one thing. I also feel that it's very, very important. I don't know, Teju, how I'm doing for time, but out of time.
Yeah, anyway, if you have any quick last response you want to finish, please go ahead.
Yes.
No,
you can finish it, ma'am. Then I'll.
We are not taking questions
fine,
right
fine.
now. We will come
No,
back.
I don't have a question. I just wish to add
Later,
something,
please.
but it's okay. You can continue, ma'am. Please go ahead.
No. So I was just going to say that other than this aesthetic, there's also empathy. Empathy that literature puts you in the stance of a spectator. And it's in the spectator role that the human capability for empathy develops. And for me, that is like very foundational, a foundational capability to develop. So I'm just thinking that, other than thinking about the decoding of the script, read aspects of literacy. Of being a human being, an educated human being. I just wanted to.
No, that's important, because I think that I was going to use that as a segue to kind of open certain things with Sandhya. But what is really, I think, connecting what Mridula opened out and what you are saying now, it is important to have spaces, libraries, where there is a diverse collection of books that enable a child to recognize the complexity of the world that they live in and where they are located. Each individual child, as they engage with these books, what kind of questions do the books open out? And a diverse collection should be able to do it. A diverse collection of good books should be able to do it. And those are the books that you include in your library. And that's the kind of library space that you want to create, where there is access and there is meaningful access. There is access that allows for the reading to be not a chore, not something that you don't look forward to, but something that you enjoy, but also something that allows you to understand deeply and critically of what's happening to you. And the what kind of as librarians, how are we doing this? And that's the question I think we should also start thinking about, the nature of the spaces and the nature of the collections that we are kind of putting together in our library spaces. So I think with what both of you have said, I would like to kind of bring it back, I think, when we are with the Sandhya, to the child. Again, we started with who the children are in some sense. And I think now, as someone who's a beloved children's writer, many of us have known your writing from, I've known your writing from a very long time, when I was quite young. So, but if you think about having to write with children, or as a librarian having to work with children, I need to understand the child who's in front of me, not as an abstract entity, not necessarily, but as part of society, but also that individual who's there. Now, as a writer, I'm sure you also know that it's important. I mean, any of your books, I would take Mother Sari, for example. I mean, it's a beautiful book with a really sensitive understanding of the child. And the children love the book, right? So what do you kind of, why do you think that's important? Like understanding who is in front of you, the child. And because as far as the creation of this particular, this book is concerned, you have a lot of pieces that work towards about. You kind of begin by sharing why you think this is important, and then talk a little bit about how the book also covers this.
Thank you, Teju.
I don't have an academic background. I have not studied children's literature, nor have I studied how libraries work or what they should be doing. But I do know that I have read books all my life. I have tried to discover libraries wherever I have gone. And in fact, there is a library in my neighborhood, which is a branch of the district central library. And I have, every time I pass by, I want to go in, but it is so dark and it looks so dismal. I cannot bring myself to go inside. And I think, which child would want to go in there? So Mridula, even before we talk about, the whole, about, how caste impacts so much of what we do, it begins even earlier, where this physical space you create is so antithetical to anything that may bring any sort of joy to a child. And so, that kind of thing, those are the kind of things that work in my mind. But to be very honest, let me just start with talking about how I started writing for children. Mainly because I would, like I said, I was a reader myself. I was privileged, and therefore I was able to become a reader, and I continued to do that. However, growing up, looking at children's books, it was natural to look at children's books. And growing up, there were only these Western books, and the only thing that was given to us to read was the, retellings of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, wonderful in themselves, but doesn't really, it didn't really catch my fancy. And then whatever else was available. So talking to a friend, we said we should create books that our children will identify with. Now, at that time, we didn't know who these our children were, because we, now thinking back on it, you were thinking of it from a position of privilege. Nevertheless, that's what we were thinking about. And then so I started writing, because when you want to publish, you need to have books, and that's how I started writing, to be very honest. It wasn't like there was some, burst of some desperation or burst of inspiration to write for children. But I think one of the things that maybe it was instinctive, I don't know. One of the things that did influence me when I was writing, when I was thinking about stories, was what Shailaja has mentioned, how very, very important it is to connect with you're writing, obviously you're not writing a journal, you're not writing for yourself, you're obviously writing to be published, you're obviously writing to communicate. So if I wish to communicate, what would be important, whether you wish to communicate with an adult or whether you wish to communicate with a child, it is the same thing. You have to draw that reader into the world that you're creating, so that world becomes the child's world. It's not that I know how a child's mind works, or I know about how a child's psychology works, or that I'm influenced by these Western trends to write books with a certain levels of vocabulary. If you're this old, you'll only know these words. Like, for instance, famously, Isaac Bashevis Singer said, difficult words won't stop a child, but a boring story will. And that's exactly it. So again, about I was very fortunate that I grew up listening to stories, and I'm a very good listener of stories, listener too of stories, and I'm able to take it all in when someone is telling me a story. But when I try and listen to an audio book, it doesn't hold my attention the very same way that a storyteller sitting in front, like my grandmother, for instance, sitting in front of me and telling me the story. So clearly there are two different things, and that you will find, you were talking about what we have in this book that addresses these issues. I think you will find it's not spelt out exactly like this, but these are the kind of things that are being communicated in Deepa Kiran's piece on performative traditions, for instance. So as a writer, we are constantly being told, I mean, people who write texts, for instance, for children, are always told, you know, if you write history like a story, children will start to understand it, you know. Telling someone stories same way, and luckily today we have some young historians who are able to do that. But again, linking this to what Shailaja was saying about reading to learn and learning to read, I mean, it's such a complex world, because you have all this, then you have literacy, you have literature, you have all these things coming at you in a country in which we speak so many languages, in which people, an individual might speak 3 or 4 or 5 languages, but may not be able to read and write in any of them. So communicating these ideas, in order to communicate ideas, I think empathy, emotion, and honesty, you know, a sense of integrity to the text, to the story, to whatever it is important. I have to say that when I write, I'm really not thinking so much of the child, because I don't know, one child might like something, another child may not, and I don't know. I cannot speak for everybody. I cannot write on behalf of anybody except myself. So, but I have to have that, you know, I have to keep all the windows of my mind open, so that whatever ideas come, you know, and they filter through whatever it is that goes on in my mind, I am able to put it down on paper in a way that the emotional sense of the story, the integrity of the story, is communicated in as honest a way as possible. And you'll find a lot of this in the second half, in the third and fourth parts of this book. Again, like I say, it's not like you know, very, very specific conclusions have been drawn. No. But for instance, where Sujata Narona talks about children's responses to stories, you know, that gives you some indication, you know, as to what children are expecting. But that doesn't mean you have to write. Another, for instance, is Australian writer called Libby Haythorne. She once told me, she said, you know, never ever share a story with a child, because you will never write again after that. Because children can be your biggest critics, and they will find the most, the thing that you didn't think about at all. But it's important to take that into consideration. You know, it's very, very important, because children are as sharp critics as the best literary critic in the world. And they, most often at least, they are blunt, they are honest. They tell you to your face, it's boring, I don't want to sit and listen to what you're saying, or I don't want to read your book. You just have to take it. But you have to have faith in yourself and be honest to whatever it is that you're trying to say. I do not write, in a way I can say, maybe writers write for themselves rather than for somebody else, but what would keep them steady would be to remember that they need to communicate. What is it you're trying to say? X vocabulary for so-and-so and Y vocabulary. But there is one last thing before may I? One little thing. This thing about there's this long-standing debate, you know, certain children's found or discovered in books. I think it's very important to keep that in mind. Who is writing for who? But a good writer, a sensitive writer, a sensible writer, a writer who is honest, can imagine and understand that world and take children into that world as well. I've had many children tell me that, you know, they like to read stories in which they find children like themselves. There was this book that we did in the aftermath of the tsunami, My Friend the Sea, and that was translated into several languages, Tamil included. And I got feedback that children from a certain fishing village were so excited, happy, to see that book. They said, we're constantly reading about other people, now they can read about us. So I think all of these things need to be kept in mind. And I think the first thing you have to get rid of is your ego, and then I think it just gets a little bit easier.
Thanks, Sandhya. In some sense, what before we just open out to the audience for question, we can start having them now. Start typing them, please, on the chat and on YouTube. So, in some ways, what we are seeing is we are trying to imagine as librarians here, trying to say, okay, what kind of spaces do we create where children thrive and learn and uh, and kind of engage with book game, who runs them, who writes for whom. What should be the work of us as librarians, as library. What do we imagine ourselves as engaging with books and opening out books? Do we imagine ourselves as being people who are sitting by the child, by the children when they are in reading and opening? Do we imagine ourselves as people putting books on shelves, or all of these? Right? And if we are doing all of these, then how do we kind of influence how this space shapes up? What should be the nature of this space? What should be the nature of the reading experience for the child? When we are talking to publishers and giving them feedback, are we asking them complex and difficult questions about the books that they put out for children? When we are talking to children, are we listening to them when they share what they feel about the books that are there on our shelves? And when we work with each other and look at the spaces that we create, what is the basis for the nature of the space that we create? Are we reflecting the realities of society and the values that we hold uh, for children today and tomorrow? So I just want to now opening it out for all of you, and please share your questions. We'll take them. I'm not sure if we can go into our third segment too much, but we'll try to spend as much as possible with the questions, and then see how much we can go back to that last segment. All right.
A very good evening, sir. I'm a
Yes.
librarian myself. Sir,
Yes,
I don't have
sure.
any doubt. I just want to share two, three things. Like as you said, that the role of a librarian. If we see that when we are taking up the course of a librarian, which nobody nowadays, so nobody is taking up, I think. But when I have studied, we are not being taught anything related to see how we should be dealing with students, or how we should be, matlab, making interest, making the books interested for the students. We are not taught anything like this. We are just taught the work of the librarian, that is the access being done in the library, whether it is a primary library, school library, or academic library, or a college library, or in big institution library. One. Second, as a ma'am was saying, that the kids are simple, are taught like Ram ghar gaya, wo ped par chadha. This is the basic. Now also in our education system, now also the kids are being taught same. There are no steps taken by the school or by the teachers also to make the child learn how to read. There is no session, no class, no particular teacher is being assigned for this work. It is left on the students only. They will learn gradually. They will learn step by step. They will learn class by class. Like I have two kids, and my son, he is in first class. I When he just entered in the standard first last year, I went to his class teacher and I said, is there any session or a class where you actually teach the kids to read? to read the alphabet other than the textbook, other than the syllabus. And the ma'am was said, no, there is nothing like this. So, ma'am,
All too
how?
common, Shilpi.
Yes, yes, exactly. That's so having option. And I asked him, ma'am, how will the student attempt the exam paper or the paper which you will be giving? How he will, unless and until he will not read, even if I make him rectify the answers, how he will write unless and until he will not read. The
So,
school
Shilpi,
focus, the
if I
teacher
may, if I
focuses.
may, if I may request, I think the point you're trying to make is that I think is echoing what Shailaja has said in terms of the nature of
Yes,
classrooms.
there
That
is
is,
nothing is been done in the
yeah,
school for the
that
kids
cannot.
to.
That's right.
But yes, this the management do ask when I go for some interviews in the school. The first primary question of the management will be how you will how you will develop the reading habit in the.
Yeah.
If I say, ma'am, this
Shilpi,
is not a work of a librarian to
yeah.
develop a reading habit in the kids.
So I would
This is
suggest
not our work.
Shailaja has left a comment for you. So just look at the comment. I think that may help you kind of think this further. So
But yes, I like Shailaja ma'am's query and whatever she said. I completely agree with her.
thank
Thank you
you.
so much, sir. Thank
Yeah. So we have one question. I'll begin with that. Sandhya ma'am, we are a big fan. We read. You saw the question, I think. No. Do you have a response? Okay. So, what activities can be done to engage children with literature? I would. Mridula, would you like to take what you do in TCLP? Would you like to share some of the things that you do? I
Well,
do remember you
I do
said
think it is
read
a
a lot.
librarian's job to work on building the reading habit of children, just as much as it is a writer's or publishers or anyone else's. I mean, we're all collectively responsible for our children. And without reading, there's no power. I mean, kids, they have wonderful imaginations and they have very rich inner lives. But the thing about books is that's where you have access to the inner lives of all kinds of, people throughout history. And you actually, like, long after you're dead and gone, your thoughts linger on in the thinking that you did with books because or to other children. And at any given moment in time, a child reading my mother's sari here in Delhi is talking to the child in Tamil Nadu who's reading the same book. That's a pretty phenomenal distance and time that the two children are traveling across to talk to each other. And that just brings us as a society closer. Ultimately, it empowers children. And because reading is power, we have to take collective responsibility for it happening. In our library, I think the read aloud is the key methodology because reading is socially constructed, like gender and everything else, like we decide together, right? Like what something is. We decide together that we want to sit at a table to eat, or we want to sit on the floor to eat, or we want both options. It's not either or, like I think when we decide together what reading is, we have narrowed it. Sandhya talked about one kind of narrowing. I think there's all kinds of narrowing happening. And one of the narrowings that has happened is that people are reading individually. They're going into bookstores or they're going into private libraries because those are the only options. There are no public libraries. There are no community libraries. The schools which are public, that is government-run schools that are open for everyone to join, don't have books inside them for people to read beyond the very limited number of words that a child is exposed to in a textbook every year. So to like really like have a different experience of reading, one that is more collective and joyful, I think a read aloud can be a very powerful tool. And in a library, it is a very powerful tool, which is why librarians are also responsible. Now, I can see why librarians would think they're not responsible, because how do you do it by yourself? So I keep going back to the first point. none of us are individually responsible for what is missing or our imagination to only what they already know. Most of the time when the little bit of writing I did was all about trying to imagine what I didn't know or the questions I had. And it would have been boring to sit down and just like transcribe like from a voice in my head what I'd already heard. I was trying to hear something new in myself. But I think when we talk about collective responsibility, like you're giving me this minutes, I'm going to say that there's a lot of conversation going on in our country right now. It's happening at the government level, it's happening at grassroots level, it's happening in the writing world, it's happening in the academic world. People are talking about the right to read. And I want to invite all the librarians here to start thinking really systematically, collectively, if you have associations, if you have bodies, if you have trade unions, if you have this organization, which is a collective, start thinking about like, what is your systematic response to taking responsibility for the question of right to read in India. And definitely do read aloud, read aloud, read aloud. And not like, National Read Aloud Day or once a month read aloud, but daily. And if you're reading aloud with children who are not going to go home to a read aloud, better be doing 2 or 3 or 5.
Thanks, Mridula. Sandhya? Mute.
You're on mute.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Mridula says, reading aloud is so important. And I would say it's very as important to read aloud to small children as it is to read aloud to older children. People think, okay, read aloud, library sessions for storytelling, whatever it is for little ones. But I think reading aloud to older children and reading aloud to groups of adults, reading aloud to women, all of these things are empowering.
Teju?
I have another question for you, Sandhya. Sorry, Shailaja. The question on the read aloud itself.
Yes.
And
of conducting.
What is it? But also along with it is appropriateness. What kind of book? How do you choose the books for read aloud? So
may I also take this one about I'm visiting schools about all the effect of conducting a read aloud. So one technique that we have used when we used to run a annual festival called Kathavana in Bangalore is teacher as reader model. Teachers themselves come from backgrounds where they have not been read to, they don't understand the power of reading, etc. So when Sandhya said read aloud to adults, we actually have done 2 different kinds of reading with teachers. One is conducting read alouds with teachers who are groups of adults and helping them feel the power and the joy and the confusion and all of that. And then saying, what do you think a read aloud should be used for? How should it be used? Then they're able to make a better connect. And the other is getting teachers to sort of read short stories in literature discussion circles and have them discuss it and uncover meanings and discover meanings and critique and appreciate. And they're like, oh, wow, and then when you give them that workshop on how to conduct a read aloud, the connects are far more authentic and organic. So do spend time conducting sort of teacher as reader workshops. That is one point. And the second point about how do you make appropriate selections. I mean, there is no pat answer to this. There are, of course, reading lists and, there are different organizations that have put lists of books that you can use. But really, this is something that you learn in practice. You can use those lists to guide you. But what book will work with a group of children in your context? Only experience and practice will tell you that. If I tell you that this book is great for this level of readers, you may find it just bombs with your children. But if let it bomb, I would say don't be afraid to try a book and have it fail. It's not the end of the world. But after 2 or 3 of these kinds of interactions, you are going to get a sense of what would work with the different kinds of readers within your context. And then the reading list, the guides, etc., are sort of support systems for you to pull out from to sort of try your experiments. I mean, I wouldn't be more prescriptive than that, Teju. Yeah.
Hi. I'm sorry to interrupt.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry. One question for you, Sandhya, and then we'll take whoever is speaking. I didn't know who it was. So the question is about when we think of children's picture books, Indian ones are a lot of times are what you read is what you see. Globally, there are more picture books for children which are much more abstract. Does that help a child's imagination better? Is that something we should do more with our books as well?
I mean, I don't believe in being prescriptive, and I think like I said, to go back to this whole thing of integrity. I mean, what the writer, what the illustrator, the story that emerges from you is the story that will work for you or may not work for you. Now, this thing about abstraction and what you see is and reality. I think everybody has imagination. I think you need imagination to read even very, very dull technical stuff, because without imagination you cannot do anything in this world. So, and we don't realize it, but in our daily lives we are converting abstraction to reality and practicalities every moment without even realizing it. So I think I don't believe in this kind of separation, because eventually when you also go beyond the written word, and what exists beyond the written word is what actually stays with you, So I mean, if there are more books, more abstract concept based kind of books, fine. If there are more reality based books, fine. But how does it leave the child feeling? Does it leave the child feeling dull, depressed and hopeless? For me, that's a very important issue. At the end of talking specifically about picture books, at the end of a picture book, if a child is left feeling hopeless, there's a difference between a child being left feeling hopeless and a child being left with questions in his or her mind. So these are I would focus more on those kind of things than on abstraction or non-abstraction.
In fact, there's a specific question for you before we go to the voice, whom I couldn't identify. I'm sorry. But this question is for you. As a writer, how do you navigate the evolving reception of a book? One that was once widely loved but is now viewed through a more critical lens. For example, Icky Doki. How do you balance intent with changing cultural perceptions, and do you believe authors have a responsibility to revisit or respond to these shifts?
I think a tale is a kind of a story, a certain genre of storytelling. An original concept-based book is a different kind of thing, and a fantasy tale is a different kind of genre. And then again, I believe that stories can be interpreted in different ways. I know Icky Doki has come up for a lot of, it is the best-selling book that I have written so far. It has also received a lot of criticism. It brings up issues of, gender stereotypes, the good girl versus the bad girl. But, this is I don't see it exactly like that, because yes, it follows a certain kind of trope. However, when it ends with it being, it ends with everyone being comfortable with who they are, accepting who they are and carrying on. That's how I would view it. In fact, when I was told this story, it was very clearly one girl being punished and the other girl, winning all the laurels. But I approached it subtly differently, but I look at it like that. So but anything you do, anything you write is open for discussion.
Thanks, Sandhya. The voice, whoever you are, please unmute.
I'm so sorry. I'm Roshni. I'm from Mumbai.
Yes, Roshni, please.
Yeah.
If you have a question, can you make it brief, please? Just in interest of time.
Yeah, okay. So that is why I didn't want to type. So basically, I am not a librarian by degree, but I'm a mother, and I have two children, and I would like to be a champion of children's books. I have like roughly 600 curated books for my children at home, and I try to do activities in the apartment, in my child's play school, and all of that, book related activities, read aloud, and all of that. But I want to do a more substantial work, because I've tried to discuss with the primary coordinator of my daughter's school also, that I have a few ideas for having some activities at the library, but it is kind of a very, I wouldn't call it bureaucratic, but it has to go a lot of through a lot of steps. And the librarian also, I don't know, because one of the librarian who just spoke earlier, she said that even during the degree, like while doing the degree, they are not taught these kind of specifics as to like how to approach the kind of books with the children and all of that. So I would like to understand, see, I want to be in this space, and I want to almost 40 right now. So how do I approach? And is a degree to be a librarian is very important to work in any school? Or like I'm sure this is a completely different perspective of what everybody else is asking here, but I really want to do something in children's literature world and for the children, and more to be around them. But I really want to understand, how should I go about this?
So I'll take this question. Sorry, I'll just quickly respond. See, Roshni, you're in your library, you have children around you. Just start working with them and see what you discover through that process. If you really feel you want to go beyond that, I mean, you've already started that, but please continue. I think there are courses that we have. The one I used to teach in a course called the Library Educators course from Goa. There is another course that is the Hindi course also available that Parag runs from Bhopal. Eklavya also runs a course called Library Se Dosti. So there are more learning opportunities that are now available for you to participate in. I would urge you to look them up. That those are specifically addressing working with children, the children's library space. And I think beyond that, right now, I think working with children, continuing to work with it, is something that you should try and do. The school space is something else, because it requires you to do maybe many schools will ask for formal qualifications. If you want to get that, please go ahead if you want to work in a school. But it may be that most schools would like that, but some schools don't. Some of these courses are certified, so you should look them up and see if you can take them on. I mean, participate in learning. Mridula, I had a question for you, because you had brought up, I think the question is from Priyanka from Buxar. Me and my siblings are working on starting a library for children in our hometown, Buxar. There's poverty and caste issues. How should we go about it? What are the basic things we should be taking care to make it a success, including reading habits among children, attract them to the library?
I want to give a big shout out to the Free Libraries Network, which runs excellent trainings on how to do read alouds and how to do it with an anti-caste perspective, which is not the individual read aloud, but the system inside which the read aloud exists. Those read aloud trainings, they're like pre-day residential trainings, are called Hakki Library, and they're free to the members of Free Libraries Network. Recently, we were in Eklavya doing a training with Eklavya practitioners on how to do leadership development inside their libraries, their community libraries. So one aspect of anti-caste library training is making sure that you're empowering people with librarianship. I don't think you need to have library science degrees to do good librarianship, because if we wait for that, we won't be able to catch up. And because the people who have been excluded from librarianship, just like the people who have been excluded from reading have been excluded on the basis of dividers like caste. We need to say that at this point in time, do it as people enter library science who've been excluded from library science. I was typing an answer to Priyanka, so I'll stop doing that and instead say it. I think your library needs to be free, Priyanka, because free is not the answer to everything, but it is, there is no option but free for inclusion. You cannot have sliding scale. You cannot have कि किसी के पास पैसे हैं तो देंगे, somebody has money so they'll give, and sponsor someone else who doesn't have money a cup of coffee. Why don't you have this child read? Well, what happened to the child's right to read? I mean, why is it dependent on the goodwill of someone who's giving up their cup of coffee? And it all gets down to individual, people giving up coffee. And next thing you know, Sandhya will ask you to stop writing books so someone else can write a book. This is not a finite world. We can all write books. We can all keep drinking our coffee. And I think we should have certain key practices. Really good library systems exist all over the world, and in bits and parts, a little bit in India, too little, that are built on the premise that people have a right to read. So you're not going to put a monetary value on it. And the effect of that is the person, the child in Buxar who enters that library is on an equal footing with any other child, regardless of whether that other child is wearing a nice frock or already knows how to read, or their mother held their hand and walked them in between tennis class and some other class. In our library, everybody coming in on an equal footing has done a lot to dismantle the ways in which outside the libraries, the structure of money and market has divided people from one another. And that structure of money and market has worked with caste, sort of modernizing caste, which is why, I think, Sandhya, you were talking about how ugly some of these buildings are that we send children to spend their whole day in, and confine them to studying things that are not as meaningful as they might have been. Well, the vast majority of the people entering those buildings are Dalit Bahujan people. It is not a coincidence, it is a systemic collusion. So we have to systemically undo it. And so I think your library needs to be free. In case you register the library, I don't mean register in the legal sense. In case you sort of create a library and it's on day one, you have a name for it, or you feel like it's a library because two people sat down together and you have a collection of 10 books you're sharing between those two people. And I think Raushni was talking about reading in her building and reading in the play schools or programs her children are part of. What you're doing is already you're running libraries. You just have to have the courage to say you have a library. And I know that one of the reasons we don't have courage is because people tell us we don't have a library science degree. I don't have one. I've been doing it for about 11 years now. The library I'm part of, and other people definitely worked on this with me, has like 13,800 members in it over the last 11 years. So people definitely want to read. You don't need a library science degree. You need it to be free. People come in. You've got only 2 people and 8 books, 10 books. You're doing it in a small way. You found the courage to say it's a library. Please join the Free Libraries Network immediately. That is the association, the professional body, the trade union, the systemic response of grassroots children in Buxar librarians who are saying we are ready to create a collective response to this question of being excluded. Free Libraries Network is doing all kinds of amazing political things, which are absolutely necessary. So the minute you are doing this library work very, very bravely, and I really mean the minute, you can just go online and say, I'm in, and you'll be in. After that, there's trainings, there's resources, there's books, there's publishers discounts, publishers and writers and all kinds of educators have been so good to the grassroots library movement in terms of welcoming us into spaces, because they see a problem and they see us working on the problem and they want to be part of working on the problem. It's been quite a brilliant and enlightening and encouraging journey for me to see that this the system problem is not some, insurmountable one. People created it, and it looks like good people want to create a different system. So Free Libraries Network is one thing I would recommend anyone here who's doing any sort of ad hoc librarianship outside of maybe the paid libraries in which you are. Run over to the internet and join, and people will start talking to you right away. We have a daily WhatsApp chat group, which is phenomenal. And then a monthly, mediated discussion and all kinds of other good things, including that training which I mentioned.
Thank you, Mridula. I think we are definitely out of time. And the last segment, which I hoped we kind of would respond to certain things that would emerge, I think it's all right. We'll leave that for another day. But thank you all for coming here and being part of this evening, listening to people who have contributed to this book. I urge you to kind of get a copy. The book is priced at it's a fat book, as you can see, but it's just over 400 rupees. The paperback is available from Eklavya. Please look up the website. Yeah, Sandhya.
Just one little thing I'd like to say with respect to the book. I just want to clarify that although, there's a lot that the book has, there's also a lot that it doesn't have. So, but but that is the nature of the work, because, you can only put so much, you can only get so many people to write about so many things. But there's so much more that needs to be said, that needs to be discussed. And we hope that the book will motivate anyone looking at it or using it to think further and beyond the book. That's all I want.
Yeah, thank you, Sandhya. Now I'll hand it to the organizers to kind of wrap up the session.
Thank you so much, Tejasvi, Sandhya, Shailaja, and Mridula. I think everyone here has to agree with us that this has been so thought-provoking and absolutely engaging, enriching in so many different ways. I think we can take better ideas and better books to children, and absolutely let's empower them, let's ignite imagination and enrich their worlds. So on behalf of Librarians of India, Apeksha, Nita, and I would love to thank all of you for being here, giving us your time. And please follow us on all our socials. We've got the links out. We're available on Instagram and LinkedIn. And we'd love to connect, and let's talk more about libraries and book love. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.